I'll get going in just a second.
Did we get to meet Justin before?
We did.
Hi, Justin.
Justin
All right.
from Utah, and he's part of a pest control company. He's attended a Toastmasters meeting in Utah.
But he's originally from California, right? Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Yep,
about.
that's right.
What part?
6:45.
You know Riverside?
Yes, we do.
Yep. So I lived there for up until I left the house. So good times.
Is it on fire?
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What part of Utah are you in?
I was in Vineyard.
Mm.
So I lived there for just about a year. And then we came here. So
Welcome.
thank you.
All right, we will begin. Welcome, Toastmasters. I feel like I haven't been here in 2 months, but I think it's just been a couple of weeks. This morning's theme is justice. Seems like a good thing to talk about these days. And I went back and looked at some of the quotes from our founding fathers and what they hoped for us as a nation. So I'll be reading a few quotes as we go throughout our morning. The first one is from George Washington. The best and only safe road to honor, glory, and true dignity is justice. And then from Alexander Hamilton, why has government been instituted at all? Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. All right. Our first person speaking this morning will be Heidi with our thought of the day. And Heidi, if you would explain your role and give us your thought of the day.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. I just share a short little thought, or I can do a reading or say the pledge. It crossed my mind to do that today. But I also did a little research into some of the quotes from our founding fathers, and I'm glad that I didn't choose those because Cheryl just shared a couple of them that really stood out to me. But what I did decide with our theme of justice and with the recent passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I decided to share something that I found from her. So in 2018, she received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Genesis Foundation in Tel Aviv. During her acceptance remarks is how they worded it, she shared some quotes and stories from 3 very strong Jewish women that impacted her life and her work specifically. And then she closed with these words. I was asked some years ago by the American Jewish Committee to supply a statement on how my heritage as a Jew and my occupation as a judge fit together. I responded this way. I am a judge, born, raised, and proud of being a Jew. The demand for justice, for peace, and for enlightenment runs through the entirety of Jewish history and Jewish tradition. I hope in all the years I have the good fortune to continue serving on the bench of the Supreme Court of the United States, I will have the strength and courage to remain steadfast in the service of that demand. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Heidi. That was awesome. Very appropriate. Next, we will have Diana, who is our grammarian today. Diana, would you please explain your role and give us our word of the day?
Yes, I will be listening for perhaps errors in your grammar, but also excellent uses of words. And I put my word of the day. When I'm grammarian, I like to see what Merriam, whatever dictionary has for their word of the day. And sometimes it's appropriate. So today the word of the day was gauntlet, which is a noun. And you might know that sometimes it comes from the gloves that the knights used to wear. And so if they would either wear the gauntlet to protect their arm or throw it down as a challenge. And I also have seen it written as kind of an obstacle course, almost like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to run the gauntlet of approval by people who didn't approve women in the legal field. So I put some information about that in the chat that you can read more about the history of the etymology of the word gauntlet. So I will challenge you to use the word gauntlet in your speaking today. And then Linda is going to be doing the counting, I see. So she's going to be looking for your filler words or great pauses.
Thank you, Diana. All right, now it is time for our first speaker, who is Sophia this morning. Welcome again, Sophia. As mentioned before, Tanner will be doing your evaluation, but we're also reserving a couple of minutes for what we call popcorn evaluation. So everybody be making a note of a sentence or two that you'd like to share with Sophia along with your written feedback to her. Sophia, what are the particular things you'd like us to be looking for?
Yep, so I've got two questions I meant to ask you before. They're both pretty simple. The first is, what was my big idea? And then the second is, where did I leave you hanging?
What was your big idea and where did you leave us hanging? All right. All right. So this speech that Sophia is giving is in preparation for a TEDx Cherry Creek Countdown, which is a global conversation about climate change to be held on October 10th. Sophia's speech will be 10 to 12 minutes. Help me welcome Sophia.
Great, I'm gonna stand. I don't know if that's normal for
That's great.
But I also don't know if my light will actually, it's like still really dark in this room. Okay, great. And then I just start whenever. Great. This is the largest group I've done this in front of. You all are very intimidating. Picture a little town in the southern part of Colorado. It's in the San Luis Valley. There is a flat desert all the way around, covered in Chico bushes. The town is small, majority Hispanic Latino. The high school graduation rate is maybe 50% on a good year. And there's a beautiful stand of trees around the Juan River that runs through the agricultural area. And you can get the best tamales in the state at a little gas station on what they call Main Street. And this town has had generations of farming from both Native folks, Hispanic folks, Latino folks, migrant workers, white people, have farms that go back 12, 15, 20 generations in this area. And as I said, it's a desert, so they are dependent on that river, that small river that is the only place for 50 miles at least in any directions that can sustain a tree. And just 250 feet up from that river, there's parked a fleet of trucks with open truck beds. And what's inside those truck beds looks like soil, but what it actually is nuclear waste. Mm. In the early 2000s, nuclear waste started showing up in this place and was transferred from flatbed truck to train, out in the open by crane, 250 feet from the river, 500 feet from a neighborhood of people. And upon further inspection, there was actually no environmental audit going into that process. It took a lot of time, but eventually the community was able to come together, petition the government, and get an environmental audit. It resulted in that nuclear waste actually having to be rerouted, had to be put into better trucks and better storage that actually were able to contain the hazardous nature of this waste. But in the meantime, the water, the soil, and the air, and the people living around that area were impacted. Of course, the company who was responsible for this waste assumed predominantly Hispanic and Latino, lower than average middle income, and a really low high school graduation rate. Who's going to notice? Who's going to care? This is an example of environmental racism. And the climate movement and the environmental movement at large has come to accept environmental racism as fact. It used to be much more up for debate. People know that race is the #1 indicator for whether or not you live in a highly polluted neighborhood. People know that 70% of all hazardous landfills are in Black and brown communities. And people know that you are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized due to your asthma if you are Latino, Black, or Indigenous in this country. Now, this has created a false narrative within the climate movement. The idea that because the people who are most likely to be adversely impacted by air quality and the disasters due to climate change are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that means any action we take on climate is in fact climate justice. It is racial justice. Well, the climate movement needs to get over its white saviorism right now, because I'm here to tell you that not all climate action is climate justice, and that in fact the climate movement is not going to swoop into these communities and save them, but that in fact we will not have the right ideas, the political power, or the people power, or even the right policies to come about if we do not include all of these folks. They will in fact save the climate movement. So the first thing is just about general access and wanting to interact with the climate movement. There's a history of the climate movement being incredibly white and exclusionary. And there's a couple of key things here. First of all, if you are somebody who says living in Commerce City, maybe your partner or spouse was laid off due to coronavirus, and you know that you had to turn the heat on much earlier than normal this year because it froze in September. That heat bill changes how you're making ends meet this month. And then you have somebody from a big green show up and say, have you ever heard of the Air Quality Control Commission? Will you come testify about the importance of getting rid of old gas stoves on your health? That is a gauntlet to run through. You are trying already to meet your basic survival needs, and then somebody is asking you to come participate in something that feels very far away from you. So having those survival needs is actually a key component to allowing all people show up for democracy and civic engagement. You know, the other piece of that is that the environmental movement does not have a history of showing up for those needs. So there has been multiple instances in the past several decades of the climate movement being overtly racist, of occasionally siding against just immigration policies, you know, wanting to be anti-growth and xenophobic under the guise of that reducing climate greenhouse gas emissions. But in addition to that, we are not showing up in a way that actually supports that survivability, that meets people where they are at, that asks, what are the impacts that you are experiencing right now? Which brings me to my second point, which is innovation. There are 2 reasons that it is critical that a successful political movement actually has representation and thoughts from people of many racial backgrounds. The first is that we know that there is a history of excluding thought from anybody but white men until very recently, more or less. And that means that we were excluding women, we were excluding people of color, we were excluding Indigenous folks, we were excluding gay people from giving the best possible ideas. And now that we are in a place where generally you can get more diversity of thought, we are better innovator thinkers as society. But the other thing is that, again, if the climate movement comes in and thinks that they are white saviors, that they will fix these problems without understanding what the problems are, you won't end up with the right solutions. There's a parable about somebody going on a mission trip to Africa, and he knows that tomatoes grow really well in that area. And so he keeps planting tomatoes and trying to explain to the people that live there, no, the tomatoes are going to be great, they're going to be great, and nobody seems to care. They grow, they turn into green tomatoes. He's trying to look at all these fruits, it's going so well. As they start to ripen, still nobody seems to care what he's thinking. He's like, look at these, they're prolific, they're beautiful, they're going to help you, you're going to be able to sell them. And then before they can fully ripen, a bunch of hippos run through and eat all of the tomato plants. And in the morning, the people who live there say, well, that's why we don't plant tomatoes. But the person thought that they had such a great idea without recognizing that there is a level of wisdom and lived experience that has to come from the folks who are being impacted. So the third reason that we must include Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the climate conversation is climate resiliency. Climate resiliency is essentially how a community is able to recover from a climate disaster. For example, in the wildfires that we are experiencing on the West Coast that is demolishing people's homes, thousands of people are displaced. Now, I believe it's almost 20% of people in Oregon are displaced, are not in their home. That's a huge percentage of the population. Some of those people will have the money to either relocate, buy a new house, rebuild, and some people will not. That's a form of climate resiliency. This is why when I say that you are more likely to be hospitalized from asthma if you are Latino or Black in America, that means that healthcare is actually a climate issue. As our pollution continues to increase, people's impacts to their health increases, and access to healthcare, universal healthcare, is climate resiliency. We look at the way that city centers have a lack of parks and waterways, and we know that that means that they are several degrees warmer than the surrounding suburbs that have more green space. So folks think that the solution is to build out more parks, more walkability in those neighborhoods, which yes, let's do that. But if you are afraid for your life as a Black man, as a Black father with your Black son, and you cannot occupy those parks, they're not doing what they need to for you in your community, which is why Black Lives Matter and police reform is in fact climate resiliency. When we look at the ability to relocate when you are in a floodplain, if you are living in housing that doesn't have climate control, when you are experiencing wildfires knocking on your door, and your ability to either relocate, to pay for a tutor as your children miss school, your ability to lose basic needs and replace them, those are issues of economic justice, which is why a livable wage is climate resiliency. All of these things have to be a part of climate justice, and it is on the climate movement's best interest, both ethically and from a political strategy standpoint, to show up in those spaces. So what do? A lot of folks in the last few months have come to realize that racism is still really prolific. And white people who are working to educate themselves are reading more than they've ever read about anti-racism, about how racism is showing up, and that's all really excellent. And then what? Well, if you are somebody who is already an activist or staff person or volunteer at an environmental organization, you are in a good position to help with the next step. A lot of environmental organizations sent an email in the early summer about how Black Lives Matter in support of police reform. It is on the onus of them and on you as maybe a member of that movement to ask them what's next. Do you have an environmental justice platform? Do you intend to show up for police reform, for healthcare, for wages, for other types of racial justice within your political power in the next year? Those are the key types of next steps that takes it just from words to action to change. And that type of racial justice and economic equity will build a more diverse and representative climate movement and will help us solve the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Powerful words. If everyone would now take a moment and write out some feedback for Sophia that we'll share with her now privately in chat, and then we'll also have evaluations in a little bit. So I'll give you all a minute of silence for that. All right, now we'll go on to our second speaker, who is Bill. Bill is going to be telling us or giving us a memorial speech about a friend who recently passed. Bill has 3 to 4 minutes. Linda, if you could unmute him, that would be great.
I am trying and it's not responding.
Bill, if you muted your phone, if you could unmute it. There we go. Oh.
We had it briefly unmuted.
Yes.
Bill, can you try it again?
There we go. All right, thank you, Bill. We welcome you to give your speech about your friend.
Madam Toastmaster, Cheryl, and fellow Toastmasters, my name is Bill Pearson. I had opportunity over the last 5 months to read into our 7th book to Doris Lillian. Her maiden name was Blondin, B-L-O-N-D-U-N, Bojenski. She was a British subject, and at probably sometime in World War II threw down the gauntlet to the Germans who were bombing London, and worked in the bunker at the British government, where she answered the phones for Winston Churchill and for British generals. She eventually worked with the Eisenhower headquarters in London and later in Germany. She met her husband in Germany, who was working with Department of Defense. And initially it was a platonic relationship, but eventually ended in marriage, almost for 60 years. I'm not certain the exact date. She came to the United States with her husband. They had some time in Colorado Springs, then Adriel Hills, in a very close neighborhood to where I am. She was born 7 months and a day before my mother, but both of the ladies were born in 1921. She died day before yesterday, September 27th at 3:40 a.m. The books that we read were of interest both to she and I. Why I read was She Was Blind, but Ever Sharp of Mind. Her daughter, who was a professor at University of Arkansas, and a son who was here in Colorado, or maybe even closer to Fort Collins. But the daughter did one of Doris's, or Dottie as we knew her by, one of her poems of choice was a testament by Wendell Berry that I may be able to share another time, but probably not for this introduction. But a interesting array of writings. One of the observations that was particularly interesting, the author who wrote about the bunker in London for the British government the author was not aware that there was anyone living who had worked in the bunker. So at one point we had pictures taken of our group reading his book and sent to London, where he was having a book review or at least a presentation of the bunker.
Green.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. If everyone would please take a moment to write down your feedback for Bill. You can put it in chat and then we'll figure out how to get it to him.
Should people send that to you, Cheryl?
Oh, yes, thank you. So private chat it to me.
One question, who do I write the check out for the $50 again?
Sunrise Toastmasters. All right, while you're finishing up, I'll give you another quote. The dignity and stability of government in all its branches, the morals of the people, and every blessing of society depend so much upon an upright and skillful administration of justice that the judicial power ought to be distinct from both the legislative and executive and independent upon both. That the judicial power ought to be distinct from both the legislative and executive and independent upon both, that so it may be a check upon both, and both should be checks upon that. That was John Adams, poorly spoken by me, in why our judicial system ought to be independent of the executive branch. All right, our next piece of business is our table topics. And I already forgot who our table topics, Sherry is our table topics master. Help me welcome Sherry.
You, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, etc., from the preamble to the Constitution. When I heard that justice was the theme, I thought it was a fascinating and challenging topic to lead discussion on. I have been thinking a lot about it. Rather than choosing people to answer these questions, I will throw down the gauntlet and take volunteers. Justice means different things to different people. I heard recently about a 13-year-old boy who, in the heat of the moment, having an argument, committed blasphemy in a nation where they are under Sharia law. He is now in prison for 19 years. Is that justice? The question then is, what does justice mean to you? What does justice mean to you? Melanie. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is, what does justice mean to me? Well, for one thing, I was born under the sign of Libra, which is the scales of justice. So my personality is strongly influenced by right and wrong. The trick is, it's my interpretation of right and wrong, which I find is the trick to justice as we see it in the world. Is it right that the Senate is nominating a new Supreme Court justice in an election year, when in 2016, they blocked that from happening, saying that it shouldn't happen in an election year? Where is justice? I found that Sophia presented something this morning that I am embarrassed to say was not in my sphere of awareness. I am truly grateful to have had my own awareness opened this morning to the injustice that permeates racism, or because of racism, not only in our country, but in the world at large. I find that I tend to shut down in the face of either injustice and feeling helpless or powerless in the face of injustice, or because I don't know if what I think or feel is right or wrong. And I believe that is what fuels so much of the confusion and injustice that we see in our world today. This is a powerful topic for us to be discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. We learn about injustice early in our lives, maybe on the playground, maybe in the classroom where one student is obviously preferred over others. Tell me about a time early in your life when you saw or experienced injustice. Jill, thank you. Jill.
When my brother turned 21, we celebrated. We were in Santa Barbara and we're doing all the things that you're supposed to do when you turn 21. Bar hopping, drinking like crazy. And I'm 3 years older than him. So I was also very protective of what he was doing and trying to keep an eye on him. Out of the corner of my eye, somebody came, hit him in the face. He fell down and hit his head on the concrete. And I saw who did it. And we called the cops. It was a crowded night on Main Street in Santa Barbara, if anyone's aware of State Street down there. And the cops came immediately. It was amazing. I was with a friend who had medical background and she stayed with my brother. I got in the car and went with the cops to look for the person that had done this. And over time, the situation got to the courts. When it did, the suspect had a very long history of this kind of violence in the past. And we were not allowed to bring that up in the courts for various legal reasons. At the same time, LA was blowing up with the Rodney King verdict. And it was affecting everyone, and I do believe affecting our justice system and our perceptions of what is right and wrong. Sadly, at that time, our case did not go as planned, and I had to really wonder what our justice system favored in the end? And how does the legal system really work? I think when we're faced with legal instances personally, more likely than not, we feel it doesn't favor us. And that's when we need to take a step back and really try to understand, how is the justice system supposed to work?
Thank you, Jill. We know that one of our 9 Supreme Court justices died on September 18th. I wonder if anyone would like to give a tribute to her.
I would be happy to speak about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or the notorious RBG. I would recommend watching the movie to anyone who hasn't seen it. There's a great movie about her life. What was really impressive to me, one of the things that was really impressive to me was how she would take the long-term view. And in a similar way as Martin Luther King Jr. said that we need justice and peace for all people, not just Black people, she took the approach of saying, well, where are places where men are being discriminated against? And how can we bring that up as an example of gender-based discrimination that doesn't make any sense? And she recognized that to her audience, which at that time was men on the Supreme Court or in the judicial system, bringing things up where it would be easier for them to see made it easier. I've heard some people use the example of people who are left-handed who have difficulty using right-handed scissors and things like that as a way to help the majority population who is right-handed be able to understand, oh, there might be some things that we just take for granted that we don't understand, and how we might need to involve more people or look more broadly to be able to create justice. It was really impressive how Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed through many gauntlets in her life of being a Jew and discrimination of that, being a woman, being a very petite woman, being married and being a mother. And it's so amazing to think about in 1970, so many rights that we just take for granted about being able to own property, being able to have equal protection just didn't even exist. It's just hard to imagine that. I think we all owe a big debt of gratitude for Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her long view in creating more justice.
Thank you, Diana. When you yourself are a victim of injustice, as Jill described, what do you consider the appropriate response to be? Pendel.
I, for one, have not experienced much injustice. When I have, I was specific about my thoughts about that and what my reaction was. I found my words and my thoughts were powerful. Words are powerful. I'm reminded of a term we use now, people of color. I wonder what I would think if I was described as a person of no color. Was I being transparent? Was I being bland? Was I being unthought of, disregarded? These words that we use, these words that I bandy about, are powerful, and they get lost sometimes in the noise, in the fuss and thunder, in the opinionations of others. The gauntlet is thrown down to be specific with my words, my thoughts, my actions. Justice means what's morally right. What's morally right? There's a whole disease now described as moral injury. Moral injury. Well, let's not be injured. Let's be specific with our words and our actions and our thoughts.
Thank you, Pendel. And that is a good close for this. Thanks all for your thoughts and for sharing how you feel about these things. I will turn this back over to our Toastmaster.
Sherry, I'm finding myself wanting about twice as much time for table topics this morning. Thank you all for your input. Melanie, did both of our speakers make their time this morning?
Yes, they did.
All right. If you would send Melanie your vote for the better speaker today.
Pendel is the vote counter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes. Send your vote to Pendel. And did each table topics speaker make their time?
Yes, they did.
All right. Then also, please vote for your favorite table topics speaker this morning and send that to Pendel. And I failed to assign an evaluator for Bill, so maybe we'll do that one as popcorn also, and everyone can give a little input. All right, now it is time for the evaluation portion of our meeting. So Tanner will go first in evaluating Sophia. Help me welcome Tanner. Oh, I'm sorry. General evaluator. I should have given that over to Esther. Help me welcome Esther.
Hey, thanks. I will follow the evaluations with some comments on the meeting, which I've been taking notes on. But for right now, yes, help me welcome Tanner as our first evaluator.
Sophia, we are seeing more and more conversations taking place around the country regarding many of the topics you are touching on. But I must admit, it was kind of a pleasure to hear this particular aspect of that overarching conversation. So thank you for that. Some of the things I wish to note about your speech, which I very much appreciated, was the use of vivid examples. In fact, I would say that your example of the missionary traveling to another land and planting tomatoes, even though the community there was not responsive to it because of hippos tearing it down and eating them up, was actually among the more vivid examples I've ever seen. You can just picture the red flying all over the place as hippos are just gorging themselves on that. So I think it was not only a vivid example, but it very much got to your point in what you were covering there. I also very much valued the use of statistics, namely tied in when you were talking about how a number of environmental issues impact minority communities more significantly than others as well. So those uses of vivid examples, both with the HIPAA one and your opening example, as well as that of using stats in your speech, were elements I very much appreciated. In terms of things I think you could maybe take another look at and see if you believe that improvement could be made to it, I was interested. There was one point at which you noted that there are multiple instances of the overarching climate community failing to include minority groups. It's a very, provocative, powerful statement. And as an audience member, I was waiting for the example. I was hoping that there'd be an example or some statistics, say, for example, about, okay, how many minority individuals are comprised in these environmental organizations to capture, oh, there's a lack of representation or those respective issues. So hearing particular details on those areas would be fantastic. I also felt that you had a real powerful weapon on your hands in terms of those 3 reasons you were denoting regarding about how increasing minority representation in this climate conversation could be beneficial. However, I only heard the second and the third one. I'm not sure if that's my fault for being too busy writing, but I think it would stand to benefit if you started off with, here are the 3 reasons, ding, 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 and then walking through them. And then as you walk through them, at the very end, reviewing them again, just so that in my mind it can help reinforce that, because those are the things I think that would be the greatest takeaway for your audience, is if that was a vivid thought in theirs. Overall, I enjoyed your speech. I must admit it's not one I get the chance to hear that often in terms of the topic and everything covered. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanner. And as Cheryl noted, we failed to assign a evaluator for Bill, and I take part responsibility for that as general evaluator. So what I will do is give a few comments and then open up the floor, and we will do a round robin type of evaluation. Bill, I really liked your speech. You really excel at giving tributes to people. And I think it's something that is important and that you see as important too. You speak respectfully and reverently of people that you are giving tributes to, and you find those details that are important in their lives and share those with us. So now I'd like to open it up, and other people, please give your comments for Bill. Let's discuss this. Jill?
I can give some feedback. Bill, so lovely to hear you. Your voice is amazingly magnetic, even through the phone line. So welcome back. We love hearing you. And I know it had to have been a little bit of a challenge to speak to us all through the phone and not be able to see us. So thank you for being brave and doing that. You are so enthusiastic about history, always. I love what you bring to the table, to the club, in regards to pointing out so many wonderful aspects of history. And in particular with this friend of yours, it sounds like she deserves about 10 speeches, just based on her very, very amazing, rich history that no way could be squashed into a little 2-minute, 3-minute speech. So hopefully we'll hear more about her in the future. I think you had some great points about her, and maybe to circle back to how that affected you would be something that we could all work on to improve with. How does this affect us? How did their impact change us as a person or inspire us? And you have so many people in your life that have influenced you through history, both in person and fiction. I think that you wouldn't have any trouble letting us know about that. And always love hearing you, and missed a little singing today, but hopefully we'll hear that on the next round. Thanks, Bill. Well, glad to have you back.
Other comments? This is great practice for being an evaluator. Maybe you were not paying attention, but.
I'm wondering if we're gonna do popcorn feedback for Sophia, or if we're planning on spending time on that.
We do have time if we want to spend, let's say, 3 minutes on popcorn feedback. Sherry, do you want to go first? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I really liked the opening. I liked you talking about covered in Chico bushes and the best tamales, which, you know, that's a draw for anyone. And I thought that maybe at the very end, you could bring that back together, mention this at the end. So, and I agreed, I guess, what was your big idea is that we need to be more inclusionary, and where did you leave me hanging? I too was a little bit confused about the structure. So great.
Yeah, the big idea I heard was that we need to have a diverse group in coming up with solutions to make us more climate resilient. And then you gave some examples of social solutions that are related in that way. I think I felt hanging a little bit in the idea of what your main point was. Like I felt like I kind of pulled that in at the end, but all along I was not exactly sure where you were going. And my thought was, if you had some kind of foundational phrase or some kind of phrase that you would repeat overall, that would help us stay on track and help you stay on track. So it could be something like climate resilience needs climate justice, or some kind of phrase like that that helps remind us what your main point is.
Lindell?
I think I wrote mine down, but I would reiterate something. Good presence, gestures, cogent points made by a coherent delivery, reference stats, and solid logic. Suggestion, make sure the ends of your sentences don't fall off volume-wise. I was left hanging by some of your sentences. Powerful presentation, all in all. Congrats on being a motivating force in the body politic.
Good comment. Linda?
Sophia, I really enjoyed your enthusiasm. It felt to me like you had a lot of passion behind your speaking. You made me feel more passionate about climate justice, and I think that may have been your intent in the speech, is to engage more people in the fight for climate justice. I had been in contact with some of the ideas about the environmental discrepancies when communities of color have more pollution, more exposure to toxins and that kind of thing, but you really brought that home. And I thought that was particularly amazing in your speech. And I don't think I will very quickly forget those points that you made about the impact on people of color, of minority communities, maybe impoverished communities, how they are discounted and used as a dumping ground for a lot of toxic substances. And I think that was really is really an important message to share.
More comments?
We should probably move. I'm sorry, do you want to do one more?
Okay.
Phil?
If there's time. I have a couple things just reiterating, and I sent you my feedback in the chat. I don't know if you saw that. So I definitely praise you for all that you've done, but I thought I'd get to a little bit of a point for me. I would say really consider who the audience is, what is the demographics of the audience, and be careful with your language about folks and white saviors. And I don't know what the intentional goal actually is, but I would say that it does make me, as a white person who does care about the environment, a little bit uncomfortable. If that's the goal, you did it. But if you are wanting to get people on board with the idea of awareness, I think maybe a little bit of phrasing, be careful when you say people and folks and that kind of thing, is something that I've been working on in my speech. Is that kind of language that you use that can be used unintentionally to separate them, us, those people, folks, that kind of thing. And I don't think you did it extremely, but I just would like to put that little bug in your ear about that. And you're going to do awesome, and you're super enthusiastic, fluid on the stage, all those other wonderful things. But I thought I'd just mention that to you.
Okay, thank you. And now our grammarian report. How did we do, Diana?
The only incidences of grammatical error that I noticed, Sophia, I heard you say there has been multiple incidents instead of there have been. At least that's what I heard. And I heard you say that meets people where they are at. kind of going along with Jill's previous point, you probably could have just said that meets people where they are. Some great uses of phrases. Well, first of all, I heard many people use gauntlet, the word of the day. Sophia, Bill, Sherry, Pendel, Jill. I don't know, Jill, did you use it? No, okay. Some great phrases I heard. This has created a false narrative in the climate movement. Fire demolishing people's homes or wildfire knocking on your door. Take it from words to actions to change. Those are all things from Sophia. Melanie, the trick is it's my interpretation of right and wrong. And I'm embarrassed to say it was not in my sphere of awareness. Pendel talked about a person of no color. Am I being transparent or bland? And describing moral injury as a disease. And Tanner, I noticed he said you could take another look and consider changes to it. So providing a feedback in a way that was optional. And Jill said a rich history that in no way could be squashed into a few minutes. Great phrases and evocative use of words today.
Great. Thank you for that. As general evaluator, I give a short evaluation of our meeting as well as.
Do you want the all counter report?
I do. Go right ahead, please.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Diana, in the introduction of the word of the day, had a double start. And you also used the word, when you described your word of the day, you said you gave us some entomology about that word. I think what you meant was etiology. Not 100% certain, but I don't think entomology has a lot to do with the word of the day. Cheryl had one I had an from and a so from Tanner, a so from Esther. Tanner, you got into a habit of doing a little lip smack today between your words, and I know that's something that you're working on, so just encourage you to continue to be aware of that. You did say one time regarding about, and I think that was a little redundant. Sophia, I thought you had an amazing pause after you said you want us to look for what was your big idea. You did a great job pausing there. You had 2 you knows, 2 and then at one point you said more or less, which I didn't feel actually fit into your speech that well. So that is my all counter report. A pretty clean meeting overall.
Great. Thank you for that. It's important for us to look at the details as well as the big picture in our evaluations. I felt we had a really dynamic meeting today. Every meeting is different, but we did have a guest, and I hope we would hear Justin's voice in table topics, but we'll hear from you in just a moment about your impressions of the meeting. We had a guest speaker as well, and brave to step up. We have somewhat of a different approach in Toastmasters, and I hope that was compatible with your goals. And I hope the evaluation was helpful for you. Also, we had a non-visual speech today, and that's unusual. Again, I hope the comments back to you were helpful. It would be great to see you, but hey, this is a great way to learn new skills, right? To step in and do things in a different way. Overall, I felt that we had a great and appropriate theme, and it was well developed in all the different aspects. And I really appreciated hearing from all of you about your thoughts on justice. It was a great theme for this time of year. Finally, I appreciate that Cheryl agreed to capture comments for Bill in chat, and I think that's an important thing to remember. We participate in the ways that we can, and we try to make it full for everybody. So thank you again.
Thank you, Esther. All right, we are near the end of our meeting, but we certainly want to find out who the better speakers were today. and then get a little feedback before we go. So Melanie, sorry, I keep doing that. Pendel. Pendel, who was the better speaker today?
Well, we were all tied up today. There was a three-way tie for table topics.
Oh, wow.
Melanie, Jill, and Pendel. The speaker was Sophia, and
Hey.
the evaluators is kind of, well, wasn't counted for one thing. So
No.
0-0. I give Tanner and the popcorn cadre a tie. We're tied up today. So.
All right, thank you. You're right. We didn't vote. Thank you, Pendel. All right. Justin, would you be willing to tell us what you thought of our meeting today? Is Justin there? Might have stepped away. Sophia, how about you? You visited us before, right? Yeah. Tell us what you thought today.
This was just a lovely way to start the morning. Thank you so much for including me. It was a really fun topic, lively discussion, and I really enjoyed the overall, like what everybody had to say, but you know, the format of Toastmasters is something I'm not super familiar with, and I really see how it helps to like drive progress and everybody forward. It's really great. I really enjoyed the awe counter. That is just, I want that in my everyday life. I want someone to follow me around and go say, you said 4 times in that meeting. It's just incredible. It was a great meeting.
That's great. Thank you. All right. I'm going to pass.
Justin may be back.
Oh, Justin, are you back? And would you share with us what you thought of the meeting today?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, excellent. You're on my car audio, so no picture right now, but I really enjoyed it. I thought I liked the counter. I haven't been to a Toastmasters meeting for a year, but I was impressed at how well run this Toastmaster club was compared to the other one that I went to. So overall, I'm glad that I showed up, and I'm excited to continue to participate.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, we hope we'll see you again, and thank you for that feedback. It's interesting to hear, you know, about different meetings and how people receive them. I am going to pass on club business this morning since we're already over our time. So if anyone has club business, if you would email it. I want to thank everyone for paying their dues. Great job. We're all current on that. And I am going to leave you with one more quote before we go. As mankind becomes more liberal, they will be more able to allow that those who conduct themselves as worthy members of the community are equally entitled to the protection of civil government. I hope ever to see America among the foremost nations in examples of justice and liberality. This is George Washington. Thank you, everyone. If you haven't registered to vote, get out there and register. Have a great week.
Thanks.